Welcome everyone back to another episode of the Property Perspective. My name is Dipesh. I've got my good friend Shiv Horia. Super interesting topic today for everyone listening and for everyone interested in property and getting tenants. And do you know what? There's been so many changes just in the last couple of months with government and now new legislation coming out, especially around property investment and specifically the rights that tenants will have versus what they've had and how those laws are changing, which I think can cause a lot of interested investors a lot of worry and a lot of unnecessary panic in some instances.
Yeah.
I'm super excited about today's episode because I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights on what the renters reform means and what it means when it comes to things like tenants' rights versus what they are now or what they're going to be versus what they have been.
Yeah.
And does it really affect landlords as much as people are worried about how it's going to?
And investors specifically rather than landlords. Remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to help create investors where they use their money to create time for them rather than creating landlords where they use their time to create more money for them. And I think just to go straight into it then. So the first thing to say is that we do have a Labour government. And I think that we have to understand that a Labour government, by definition, means that there is going to be less favouritism towards kind of like business, entrepreneurship, and that kind of stuff, perhaps more taxation, all that. That is literally what Labour are about. They're about redistribution of income from the rich and middle class down to the people who don't have as much resources as we do. So moving from a Conservative government to a Labour government, there is going to be a shift in that direction. We've had the Conservative government for a while, we're going to have Labour for a while, and then guess what? After a while, we'll come back to Conservative, and we'll come back to Labour. And people always keep saying, oh, like they shouldn't have got into power, and we should have got into power, and these are better, and these are better. And I always say, as an investor, it doesn't matter who's in power. As an investor, what we've got to do is the best that we can do. What we've got to do, I said it to someone earlier today, is we've got to play the game. That's what we've got to do. So the fact is, if you've got money sitting in your bank right now, and you say, oh, well, it's going to be a little bit harder to invest now over the next 5 years because of Labour. Yeah, but what else are you going to do with your money? You might say, oh, well, it's going to be a bit harder, but what else are you going to do with it? You can't just put it under your mattress. So ultimately, we are in the environment that we find ourselves in. And having looked through the Renters Reform Bill, I've got some notes in front of me. It's just not as bad as people make out to be. And I think that obviously we've got to remember that the media want to sensationalize everything. They want you to read their newspapers. They want you to read their articles. And as a result, they say Renters Reform Bill, mass exodus of landlords from the market. And, it's going to be the worst thing ever. But it's like with most things, when you look at the detail of it, it's just not actually that bad. And why is it not really that bad? Because, we've got tenants, but we've also got landlords. Like both parties need to be both parties form the electorate, and both parties need to be satisfied with whatever comes to the table. What that means is that by definition, landlords are not going to be 100% satisfied, and tenants are also not going to be 100% satisfied. We're going to have to meet in the middle. We're going to have to find a compromise. So that's to preface this, we are going into a Labour government, into a Labour term. And so we are expecting these kind of things to come through. But what we need to bear in mind is that where else are you going to put your money? And we will find loopholes of how to get around some of these things. And I don't mean loopholes like, I'm talking about like legally, there'll be ways around this. So we just need to factor those things in. But let me take you through some of these things, Dipesh, because they're really not actually that bad. So the first thing to say is that the Renters Reform Bill has been...
So what I was going to say is take us through the points, and then what I'm going to do is after each point, I'll ask you a question from like a devil's advocate perspective, just to see what your take on that is for investors considering to continue investing or even start investing. Go for it.
Yeah. I was going to say the Renters Reform Bill is something that it's not just come in now as a result of Labour. It's been discussed for the last 5 years or whatever it has been, a couple of years. It just has not been progressed as quickly because we've been in a Conservative government. Labour, because when they come into power, they need to make some changes quickly so that people think, oh, wow, they're doing some stuff. And this is one of the things that they're doing at the moment. So the first thing is that ASTs, which is short hold tenancies, which is how you rent properties to tenants, they will be abolished. And as well as that, the Section 21 notice, which gives the landlord the power to get their property back without giving any reason. So it's called a no-fault eviction. There's no fault. I just want my property back. They will also be abolished. So what we need to bear in mind here, when we say ASTs will be abolished, ASTs, as in the contract between the landlord and the tenant, that specific contract will be abolished. But of course, there will be a contract in place. There will be something that says this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, and this is how much you got to pay, this is when you got to pay it. And whether we want to call it an AST or we want to call it a lease or you want to call it a license or whatever you want to call it, at the end of the day, there will be some form of legal structure that governs how a landlord and tenant should interact with each other. And then the second point there of banning the Section 21 no fault evictions, we've had a conversation about this a couple of months ago. And what we basically said was, whilst they're going to ban the no fault eviction, which means that you don't have to give a reason, they are just going to expand the powers of the fault evictions, which means that there are going to be more reasons under the Section 8 powers. And all that really means is that you now have to give a reason. It doesn't have to, yeah, you just have to give a reason for why you want your property back. So I want my property back because I'm moving back into the property. I want my property back because I want to sell it. I want my property back because my cousin's moving in. I want my property back because, you know, the tenants are causing me too much problem, or because the mortgage has gone up. It doesn't matter. Like there's obviously specific things that you can say, but as long as you have a reason, there will be a way out of the contract. You will not be left in a position where tenants just occupy your property and you cannot get it back.
Okay, so just to clarify, the AST is being abolished, but in place of an AST, as an investor, I will be able to have a contract still with my potential tenants to say, here's the terms of the tenancy, here's what can be done, here's what can't be done, here's the rules that you are being bound to as a result of this contract. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Of course, that's exactly it. And by the way, just to be clear as well, this is not law right now. This is coming into place. This is looking at coming into place probably summer next year. So it's still a way away, but yeah, that's exactly what the plan is.
Okay, amazing. And the second thing we were just talking about there, which is your ability to get your property back without reason. Now, the difference in that rule is simply we must have to provide a legit as to why we want the property back.
Correct. That's it. And then like, how hard is it to provide a reason? Here's a reason. Thanks very much. And then you can get your property back. So I don't think, I think some of these things are, they like for a tenant who's being evicted, they want to know what the reason is, or they want to have a reason. It makes them feel more secure, it makes them give them closure, whatever. Perfect. Let's give them a reason. Then we can get our property back.
Got it. Okay, perfect. What's the second thing?
Second one, landlords cannot rent for more than the advertised price. So that means that, and we do this often at the moment. So let's say, for example, we put a property on the market for £900 a month, and we now get 5 people that want to rent the property at £900. We'll go back to the tenants and say, well, who's willing to pay £950? Like, put in your best offer. How much are you willing to pay? And then maybe we'll be able to negotiate the price up to £950 instead of being at £900. That the ability for a landlord to do that is going to be abolished as well. But if you just think about like logically what's going to happen, obviously what's going to happen is a landlord is still going to want to try for 950. So instead of putting it on for 900 and seeing where they get to, they're going to put it on for 950 now, and then see how many people apply for it. And then if no one applies after a week or two, they'll reduce it to 925, reduce it to 900.
So I guess my question for you here is, for someone listening to this who's thinking about getting a property, who wants to put it on as an investment and is thinking about being able to achieve the highest rent, their ability to look at the market and say, okay, well, everything in the market is currently at 850. Their ability to say, actually, do you know what? I want to try 925. That doesn't disappear. You can still. It's just that if you list it for 925 and you have 3 tenants potentially fighting for that 925 and they agree for that, you can't then go back to them for a better offer because you marketed at 925.
Yeah, you've got to basically now choose between 3 different people that want it at 925 because that's what you marketed at. But like I said, like all that's going to happen is people are just going to rent, like the asking rent is going to be higher. That's absolutely 100% what's going to happen. And it's silly because obviously Labour put in place these things so that people feel better because they don't feel like they're having to bid for property, for housing, but rents are just going to go up. That's all that's going to happen.
I was going to say, it's interesting because what they're trying to do is put a cap on the rate at which rents are increasing because people then can't bid against each other. But the opposite side is investors aren't stupid. And
yeah, and just to be clear, one of the things that has not made it into this renters reform is rent caps. So there are no caps currently proposed or currently going to be enforced. So if you, and the next point actually is that landlords can only increase their rents once every 12 months. As in, you can't do it 3 times a year. I mean, the fact is, if you're increasing your rent 3 times in a year, then you're probably a bad landlord. Like, we're renting to tenants at the end of the day, and people need housing and they need stability. So yeah, once a year is fine, because inflation goes up once a year and everything goes up once a year. So we can say, right, we'll increase the rent once a year. So all they're doing is saying, yes, you can only increase it once a year. We only increase it once a year anyway. Like, that's what our letting agents do. They once a year, they go through and they say, I mean, what's the chances that within a 3 month period rents are going to have like changed drastically? Probably unlikely. But over a year, of course they will have. So yeah, you can only increase it once every 12 months, but that's what we do anyway.
Fair enough. Okay. Next point.
Next one. Landlords will need to join a landlord ombudsman scheme and a landlord's database. So it means that there'll be some corporate body called the landlord's ombudsman, which you'll pay 35 quid to a year to be a member of. It's a tick box exercise. And likewise with the landlord's database, like, you are now required to tell the council that you are renting out this property. Perfect. Like, what's the difference? And why are they, just again, why are they doing this? They're doing this to create they say, a fairer society, in the sense that landlords and tenants have more equal rights, but also to increase the standard of housing. Like, the fact is, if the council has the details of all the buy-to-let properties in that council, then they can go and do inspections of these properties to make sure that they are up to standard. And what it's going to do is weed out this kind of like rogue landlords, bad landlords. But we're not rogue landlords. We're not bad landlords. We're good landlords. We have all the things, certificates already signed off. We have all the properties up to a certain standard already. So as a result, I don't think that's really going to affect us either.
So the question I have for you there is, obviously this is another thing that, yes, it's a checkbox exercise, but
Yeah.
another thing that has to be paid for.
Yeah.
And is there anything that stops the government basically charging more for someone to become an investor and a landlord of a property that we can source for, like our how we do for our clients? Or is this kind of the extent to which they're going to create more of a maybe more of a regulated environment?
Yeah. That's it. That's what they're doing. They're going to an extent, they're not regulating it, but they're trying to put in place these standards that help to kind of hold, like, almost self-certified to a specific standard. And this thing about the ombudsman scheme, what happened when mortgage rates went up? Well, when mortgage rates went up, landlords' costs went up. So what happened to the rents? Rents went up. What happens if all of a sudden insurance prices double? Landlords' costs are going to go up, rents are going to go up. What happens if we now have to pay £35 extra to be a member of, or £350 for that matter, to be a member of this ombudsman? Landlords' costs are going to go up, rents are going to go up. So this is all that's going to happen. I think, we can see this all as all very negative, but ultimately the reason why property is always a good investment is because you get rental increases, you get rental return, but you also get capital growth. So you'll win either way. And in this instance, you're winning with increased rents.
Okay, just from your personal experience, do you see there being an issue with all these costs coming in, and then landlords and investors saying, well, now we're going to have to increase rents? Do you find that there may be an issue from past experience with being able to find tenants who are willing to pay the higher rates of rent, or are we seeing the same level of occupancy in properties that are available for rent, irrespective of how the rents have gone up?
Yeah, I mean, if you think, I think we've already said this a number of times, but there is just not enough housing being built every single year. The demand for properties is way higher than the supply of properties. And, inflation has increased, so people's wages have increased as well. Specifically in the north, the amount that people spend on their property, on their housing, I think off the top of my head, it was between 25 and 30% of their annual income, whereas in the south, it's more like 50 to 60%. So actually, what we're trying to say is that in the north, it's going to be much more affordable to increase rents without having too much of an issue. Whereas in the south, if you start doing those kind of things, then we are going to start having issues. And I think what you'll find is in the south, maybe you will have landlords that, and a lot of the people watching this will be people that live in the south. And so they'll be surrounded by people who also have properties in the south. And they say, oh, it's not good anymore. It's not good in the south, of course, but it is good in other places. And again, go back to the initial question I said, where else are you going to put your money? Under your mattress? That's not a good place to put your money.
It's a very uncomfortable mattress as well. Okay, what's next on the
Sure. So if a landlord needs to regain possession to sell or move in a close relative, they will be able to do so, but only after 12 months with a minimum of 4 months notice period. So what they're basically saying is, let's just imagine that all ASTs, all tenancy agreements are going to move to a 12-month tenancy agreement rather than a 6-month tenancy agreement. Well, what do landlords want effectively? Landlords want tenants to stay for longer. So moving to a 12-month is probably going to be beneficial for us, not a hindrance for us. And then the only thing that is a bit of a hindrance is that instead of having, it's currently a 2-month notice period you need to give, now you need to give a 4-month notice period if you want to sell your property or if you want to move them on. Well, in terms of selling your property, we already know that selling your property can easily take 3 or 4 months. So as long as you don't decide today and then, give your tenants notice today, you're probably in the process of deciding, having a think about it, giving your tenants notice, and then you put it on the market and then you find a buyer and all that kind of stuff. I think from that perspective, a 4-month notice period shouldn't be that much of an issue. But there is one other point further down which will affect us. But this one here basically says, like I said, we're moving from, let's say, 6-month tenancy agreements to 12-month tenancy agreements, which is fine. And we're now moving from, instead of a 2-month notice period to vacate the property, you've got to give a 4-month notice period when it comes to selling your property.
So essentially, what that really means is investors just need to have a bit more advanced planning on things that they're considering to do with their property. And if it is a situation where they're deciding to sell a property or change tenants, etc., then it just needs advanced planning with much more notice than what we previously had in terms of the
Yeah, and actually, let me tell you the next point, because so that's that point there, the 4-month notice is specific to selling the property. And the likelihood is that for a lot of our clients, they'll be buying the property and then wanting to hold it indefinitely, or at least for the long term. They're not thinking about selling it right now. And frankly, by the time they come to sell it, we'll probably have a new government in power and things will have changed by that point anyway. So that one is the 4-month notice period. The next one says for rent arrears, landlords will still be able to serve a Section 8 notice, but likely to only be possible to serve with a minimum of 3 months rent arrears. And I think somewhere in here, it basically says, so currently you've got to have 2 months worth of rent arrears in order for you to go and get possession of your property. Now they're saying the tenant needs to be in arrears for 3 months before you can go and apply to get possession of your property.
Okay, so if I'm an investor and I now am aware that I can't do anything to get my property back from a tenant that is essentially not paying rent,
Yeah,
and I can't do anything unless the tenant has 3 months worth of unpaid rent and I can prove that.
yeah,
My biggest worry and my biggest fear is that I'm now paying a mortgage on a property that is not
absolutely.
good, and my tenant's basically becoming a bit of a pain, and I can't do anything to change that situation for at least 3 months. What, in your experience, can I do to help mitigate that worry and that risk?
I'll come on to that question in a second, but ultimately, just remember, it's currently 2 months. It's going to be 3 months, so it's only 1 extra month. Remember that in the north, the mortgages that we're talking about is probably like £300-400, so it's not a massive amount. Whereas obviously in the south, you're looking at mortgages of like £1,000, £1,500. That's a big amount of money to go and find if your tenant's not paying you rent. Whereas in the north, if your tenant's not paying you rent, like what's the chances that you could find 400 quid probably reasonably easily to be able to find that 1 extra month worth of mortgage payment? And then the answer to question is what can we do? And the answer to that is, and this is exactly what's going to happen, people are going to become much more picky about who they put into their properties. The vetting process for getting good tenants is going to be much more stringent. So at the moment, we said earlier about, we're going to rent for 900 or whatever, and we're going to get 3 people that all want to get this property for 900. Instead of just saying who's going to who's going to give us the most amount of money, which may not be the best tenant, we're now going to say who is the best tenant, because we can only charge them what the price we're going to charge them. So we can say who's the best tenant, who's the best, ultimately, who's the lowest risk for us, because we don't want to go through this risk of having to evict them and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to have a look at, and this is exactly the same thing. Like, this is why we rent to families, because families, typically we have 2 income earners, a mum and a dad. We typically have a child involved. And as soon as you have a child, as you'll know soon, Dipesh, we're going to become a lot more responsible. And the third thing is that the child normally goes to a local school, and they're usually in school for, a good 5 or 6 years before they move to secondary school. And as a result of that, you're going to have people staying for a good 5 or 6 years. They're not going to want to move every 5 seconds. So renting to families, I think, is a good deal in this instance.
And then, so just to take it one step further, let's say we do everything possible to find the best tenant, find the
Yeah.
one that's most reliable, has the best credit scores, has decent income consistently, has two sources of income between a couple potentially as well. And we go through all of that, and then we still find ourselves in this position for whatever reason where rent is not getting paid, and something goes horribly wrong.
Yeah.
What would you say then, from your experience, is a good way to mitigate that risk?
Yeah.
In terms of insurance, or is it something else?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, we can take out rent guarantee insurance. That's going to be available readily on the market, and it's not that expensive. And I think a lot more people will take that out, as well as that. This emphasizes the need for a good management agent, a really good management agent, because what you want is that management agent to deal with that tenant. The fact is that if you're nasty with your tenants, they're probably going to be nasty back at you. Whereas if you can understand their issues and say, okay, we understand you can't pay rent because you know it's too much. What can you pay? When can you move out? Let's work with you and accept that, we may lose a bit of money because they couldn't pay the rent. But if we basically move them on, then we can get somebody else back into that property. But like you said, insurance is always available for people that want that added level of security.
Got it. Perfect. Any other points to go through?
Yeah, this is a really important one. For antisocial behaviors, landlords can serve immediate notice. So what we're saying is, yes, there are all these rules, but if you can prove that your tenants have had like antisocial behavior, then you can just serve them immediate notice for them to vacate.
Okay, so there are some things for the landlord.
Or the landlord, yeah. Well, is it again, like what are they trying to do? They're just trying to make it a bit more fair. They're saying if you're a good tenant, then you shouldn't be kicked out of your house just because the landlord feels like kicking you out of the house. They should have some reason for kicking you out. They should not be able to increase the rent every, 3 times a year. They want to create this society, the reason why they're doing this as well is because housing is such a large proportion of people's incomes. They know that if they can't control housing, if you don't have a stable house, then the likelihood is the rest of your life is not going to be very stable either. And the next point, the last point, I think this is the Renters' Rights Bill also aims to make the market fairer by stopping landlords from discriminating against tenants who have children or who are receiving benefits. Well, already you're not allowed to discriminate against tenants who are receiving benefits or have pets. But the reality is, if I've got 2 tenants and one has a pet and one doesn't have a pet, I might choose to go with this tenant. I'm not necessarily having to say it's because that person has a pet, but I just chose that this is a lower risk for me. It makes more sense, doesn't it? So I think those things about the pets and the benefit tenants, that is already in place, and we can just choose whichever tenant brings us the least amount of risk. Yeah, and this thing about discriminating against tenants who have children, I mean, our tenants are families, so we want tenants to have children. They make them more responsible usually.
Yeah, it's a big part of the strategy especially about schooling. Like you said, if kids are in school, the chances are as parents, you want that child to be in school at the same consistency for as long as possible. So it's going to encourage you to stay in your property for as long as possible until it comes to a time where either the child is grown up and there's no middle school or high school available there, where you then decide to move, or unforeseen circumstances, changes of jobs, etc.
What this is ultimately going to do, in general, to summarize, is we're going to have basically longer term tenancies. We're going to have people that want to stay in the property longer, and landlords are doing a lot more work to vet the tenants to get the best possible tenants. And we're also going to have better quality tenants because we're going to do that work to vet those tenants. I think there's also going to be, as these rules come out, we're going to find loopholes about how we can get around these things, because ultimately we still need to rent out properties. One of the things I always say is, imagine if there is this mass exodus of landlords, and all the landlords say, you know what, this is too difficult, we're all going to leave. Where are they going to put all the tenants? The government's going to have a massive problem. They already have a massive homelessness problem. Now they're going to have an even bigger homelessness problem. So I think they can't afford to pee landlords off too much, because they need landlords in that market, because landlords provide a huge amount of that private renter sector already. I think the other thing to say is that for long-term buy-to-let strategies, which is what we are, this doesn't affect us that much. Where this really affects you is where you have short-term strategies. So, for example, where you've got HMOs and you constantly need to, evict tenants, or you've got serviced accommodations and you need to, I suppose that's on a license, but ultimately, wherever you've got shorter-term strategies where you need to constantly be churning tenants, then you're going to have issue with trying to get those tenants out, where you want to find a good tenant and get them in the property and then be good to them for the next 5 years, and then they then move on, you find the next tenant. This is going to have much less of an impact because you're just going to have a good relationship with the agent, with the tenant. And like I said, we need to make sure that we understand that the relationship with the agent is really, really important now. The finding the right agent who can navigate these is a really important part of this puzzle now.
Absolutely. So first of all, Shiv, thank you so much for that today. I think that's super helpful, super useful, and I know a lot of people will benefit from that information. And then last thing I want to finish on is just this idea of not allowing the news and listening to people scaremongering people into believing that something's going horribly wrong. And this is why understanding and getting information, getting extra knowledge is so important, because it helps you make more informed decisions. And to finish this off, the most money investors make is in markets that are supposedly down because people reacted to and people ran away from opportunities. And let's just say that there is this mass exodus of landlords, etc. Well, investors and our clients and people that we know who are attuned to this kind of stuff will be looking at that as a very ripe opportunity to take advantage of properties that are coming onto the market, that are flooding onto the market, where we can get even better deals on and secure even better rental returns, yields, and ultimately benefit in the long term. So
remember, the best time to invest in property was 20 years ago. The next best time to invest in property is now. It's always now. It's always whenever you have the money, because you can't keep waiting. There's always going to be some reason. The renters reform bill. So remember, it was Liz Truss, the mortgage rates, the inflation rates, the energy prices. There's so many reasons. There's always going to be a reason not to do this. But ultimately, if you have the money, where else are you going to put this money? And for most of our clients, they're going to put it in the stock market and in the property market. The stock market, they're already invested in, because usually a lot of our clients have pensions, ISAs. They're already doing all of that stuff. So if they've got spare money lying around, they need to diversify that and put it into the property market. I think that's a really important point.
Definitely. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode, and we will see you on the next one.